The Caves of Qumran were unearthed in 1947. They are located 13 miles east of Jerusalem, along the shores of the Dead Sea. Here, a discovery of biblical proportions was made. The Caves of Qumran, a modern discovery with an ancient past. In the heart of the Judean desert, only 1 hour southeast of Jerusalem, a remarkable discovery was made. A cluster of caves that are now known as the Caves of Qumran yielded some of the oldest and most ancient copies of several books of the Bible. The scrolls, which include fragments of the books of the Old Testament and commentaries on communal living and apocalyptic war, have shed important light on Judaism and the origins of Christianity. This discovery came at an interesting time. In 1947, the world was just beginning to recover from the devastating war against Hitler's Nazis. And for the first time in 2,000 years, Jews from all over the world were returning to the British-controlled land of Palestine, which 1 year later would again become the nation of Israel. It was during this time a Bedouin shepherd was tending his flocks near the Dead Sea and stumbled upon what some archaeologists are calling the most important discovery in archaeological history.
Mere chance that one shepherd went to look for his goat who disappeared, and he saw in a cave something which looks like jars. He was suspicious that those jars are ammunition or something like that, because in World War II, and remember it was only 2-3 years after World War II, the Germans sent spies who were parachuted in Jericho area, and they came with ammunition. It was the idea of the Germans was to, along with the Jerusalem Mufti, to create a revolt against the British in Palestine when the British were occupied, fighting the Germans in Europe. So he was suspicious that maybe these are arms because they're very long, narrow jars, they look like bombs. He threw stones, broke one, and he saw the inscriptions, and so actually the thing was discovered. He brought them to merchants in Bethlehem, and the rest is history.
Scrolls from this cave began to appear in the hands of Bedouin antiquities dealers, and some even appeared for sale in the Wall Street Journal.
Some were purchased immediately by Sukenik, who realized their importance, the late Professor Eliezer Lifa Sukenik. So the 7 first scrolls are now exhibited in the Israel Museum. All the other scrolls came later in all kinds of ways, and especially in 67, because they were stored in Rockefeller in 67, they came to our possession when Jerusalem was reunited.
Today, many of the Dead Sea Scrolls are on display in the Shrine of the Book, located in Jerusalem. This amazing building was designed to keep and preserve scrolls in its special climate-controlled environment. But how did these animal skin and parchment documents survive for 2,000 years in the Judean desert?
The fact that the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered in the Judean desert is a very simple reason. Judean desert is very dry, which makes possible for organic materials. Because you speak about scrolls, remember, mats were discovered, all kind of basketry, all kind of organic material was discovered, like fruits and things, which shows that the climate was dry enough to save all the organic material there, including scrolls.
Today, Cave 1, where the first scrolls were found, is off limits to the public. Dr. Stephen Fawn, an archaeologist and one of the editors of the Dead Sea Scrolls, takes us as close as we can get by law.
We're at a very significant archaeological site. Tell us where we are, Dr. Fawn.
Well, we're just a little less than a kilometer to the north of the site of Qumran, and you can actually see up in the cliffs behind us that there are many caves in these cliffs. That is cave number 1, where the Bedouin shepherd first threw his rock inside the cave, and all of a sudden, the biggest discovery of the century took place.
The rugged terrain of the Judean desert seems an odd place to find ancient scrolls. Who used these scrolls, and why did they leave them in caves 2,000 years ago? In 1947, mysterious scrolls were found in the Caves of Qumran near the Dead Sea. Excavations began and nearly 900 documents and thousands of fragments were discovered among 11 caves. Written in Hebrew, Aramaic, and some Greek, archaeologists were able to determine that much of the scrolls were created and used around 2,000 years ago. But by whom? Although some might say it is still open for debate, many experts believe that a thriving community of scribes known as the Essenes lived in Qumran and made these scrolls. The Essenes were a Judaic sect that existed for around 300 years, between 200 BC to 100 AD. Their emphasis of purity drove them to find a remote location away from the vile, sin-filled cities, where corruption was a distraction from following the ways of God.
This was an extremely important center of work for the Essene movement, where the priestly Essenes met with lay Essenes, and they determined the future of the group based upon the Torah and from what they thought was being passed on to them by the oracles of God and with the angels all around about them. And there they had issues of the heart, the circumcision of the heart, being pure in body, first of all, yes, but before that, entering into the community, your heart had to be circumcised and pure.
Out in the desert, they built their community Qumran and lived a very disciplined and organized way of life, following their spiritual leader known as the teacher of righteousness.
They studied what was right and what was wrong according to the prophets and according to the books of Moses. And there they met and they felt and believed miraculous things were happening in their midst as they were cutting new ground, preparing the way of the Lord in the wilderness.
Once again, accompanied by Dr. Stephen Fawn, we explore the ruins of an Essene complex. It is believed by some that the scrolls from the caves may actually have been written here.
What are we looking at here, Dr. Fawn?
Well, here we're standing in what was probably the most tightly secured building at the site of Qumran, because there were some very valuable things that were both happening here and were being stored here.
Okay.
Among those things, of course, you would have the scrolls themselves in the library, because this was the place where the study of the scrolls took place.
Okay.
The nightly Torah reading sessions took place here. Decisions were made here on a regular basis with the laity in the larger room on the other side, the priests sitting around this room inside, and there were layers of acceptability. The lay people could not go inside, the servants couldn't go inside, so that even the washing of the hands that had to take place in order to read from the Torah scrolls, that was done through a hole in the wall with a servant taking a jug from over here and pouring it through a hole right in through here, as servants would be standing out in this area. So Joe, you can see here even the wash basin that was used by the priests to wash their hands. This up here was from a later period, so we can take that away and remember this is all plastered up to the ceiling with the wash basin here, the priests sitting around on the benches here. There were 7 lamps found on the benches over on this side because they were reading at night. They needed lamplight to read from. But you can see here, Joe, this is where this would have been a plastered bench going across here. You got to imagine there's a bench right up about this height, and each one of these niches right here, 1, 2, 3, would have had rows and rows of scrolls on shelves facing the librarian And when they would call for a scroll, then he would have to go through, look for a certain passage, roll it out until he could find the passage, then hand it to the reader. And so up above is where we know that there were scrolls written with plastered benches. There were at least 10 inkwells found at this site. That is 10 times the amount found in the entire Judean wilderness. You struggle to find even one fragment of an inkwell someplace else from this period in the Judean wilderness.
The Essenes' belief in purity and righteousness was very similar to the message preached by John the Baptist. Was John the Baptist really an Essene? One of the debates being waged amongst scholars is whether John the Baptist was an Essene or not. We know that the Essenes lived a very strict sectarian lifestyle. Their message heavily emphasized personal purity, which could be achieved by full water immersion, a type of baptism. We know that John the Baptist came from the wilderness preaching a message of purity and repentance through water baptism. Is this enough evidence? What do the experts have to say?
I don't think John the Baptist was an Essene for a number of different reasons.
Dr. Shimon Gibson is a highly respected archaeologist in Israel. He is of the mindset that John was not an Essene.
First of all, there's no evidence at all that, based on Luke chapter 1, verse 80, that he grew up in desert places. I mean, the Greek actually indicates that it's a place which is far away from human beings, but that can be also in the Judean hills, not the desert. The most important thing for me is that John the Baptist is a very inclusive person. When he's down at the Jordan River and he's saying, all of the children of Israel come and be baptized, he's saying everyone. Whereas the Essenes were very exclusive. They were very choosy about who might or might not join their group.
John the Baptist lived in the sphere of the people of the Dead Sea. He was close there, the place of baptism. All that is, he knew them, very close to them. Many ideas are very similar. I'll give you but just one example why they are different. Just small, which is very trivial, but still it can show. One of the important things about both of them was purity. Baptism, the idea of baptism is purity. But whereas the Dead Sea Scroll people used to go with white robes, which are clean, which can be easily washed, when you describe John the Baptist, what did he wear? A woolen fairy or whatever it was. That's how he's described. You can see it also in all the depictions of Christianity in art, if it is Byzantine art, if it is Renaissance or Baroque, whatever, you can see them all. So you see, even such an external thing shows that they were different. He did not belong there.
Not all archaeologists dismiss the similarities between John the Baptist and the Essenes. In fact, Dr. Stephen Fawn is convinced that he most certainly did belong to the desert group.
And John the Baptist was a person who was preparing the way of the Lord. In cave number 1 was found the community rule, which says that their reason for being out here in the wilderness was to prepare the way of the Lord. And many of the teachings of John the Baptist actually are very close to those of the Essenes.
To find out more about John the Baptist, we visited Dr. Gibson at what some believe to be the cave used by him for his baptism rituals just outside of Jerusalem.
There's a flight of steps leading down.
This fascinating cave has many engravings which appear to be linked to John the Baptist and early Christianity.
Great. Be very careful of your heads as you come in.
Oh, wow.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Wow.
So this is the Cave of John the Baptist, as we call it. To be frank, one should call it the Tsuba Cave and allow the discoveries then to speak out. Now, the earliest remains that we have date from the time of John the Baptist, and they post-date the original use of the cave, as I mentioned before, from the Iron Age, but This Iron Age water system had been abandoned and had been like that for about 600 years or so. And then this group of Jews come and they use the cave for the purposes of baptism. People were coming, they weren't living in a cave, they were coming to be baptized. The rituals themselves are divided into two. You have people who are conducting rituals in the front of the cave, and only when that had been completed are they descending into the back of the cave to be cleansed, the flesh to be cleansed in the water. Now this is remarkably similar to what we know about the baptism process of Jesus in the Jordan River. John the Baptist receives Jesus as well as others. There are all sorts of rituals which are performed on the banks of the Jordan River with the remission of sins. And this explains perhaps these remains that we have here in front of us.
The Essenes and their community at Qumran existed during the time of John the Baptist and Jesus of Nazareth. Yet of the nearly 900 scrolls found, there is not one mention of either New Testament figure. What does this mean for Christianity? The Caves of Qumran yielded one of the most important finds in archaeological history. Nearly 900 scrolls and thousands of scroll fragments were discovered accidentally by a shepherd while he tended his flocks near the Dead Sea. 60 years later, these Dead Sea Scrolls are still catching the world's attention with every new discovery and every new translation. But how close are the Dead Sea Scrolls to today's modern Bible?
We must remember that the Bible which we have today is considerably late. There are changes, very few, but still there are different versions in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Remember another thing, till then, we have got, till the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, the oldest text of the Bible we had was the Greek translation of the Septuagint, which is from the 3rd century BC. And there are differences, which means the translators into Greek in the Septuagint has got a different version. On the other hand, many years ago, about, in the late 70s, early 80s, was discovered the blessing of the priests in Jerusalem. This is identical to our Bible, which means there must have been few versions of the Bible. Dead Sea Scroll can be one, ours we've got two, and already the scholars for years know already that there are some different versions here and there.
One of the things that the Dead Sea Scrolls does for us, of course, it confirms the existence of the biblical text, and with a consistency that is really hard to believe. The biblical scholars, to see that the biblical text that they found in this cave and other caves around about, they in many ways did not really expect the scrolls to be so close to the text that we're presently using today in the synagogues and in the churches. And also it shows that there was a serious type of spiritual encounter that they believed that they had with God, similar to what the priests would have had in the temple, but this among both priests and laity, taken seriously the idea that the person's heart had to be circumcised, that it opened them up to the mysteries of God that could only happen in community with God himself. Some of the same types of things we find in the communities of the New Testament and other communities that we speak of and know of in early Judaism.
Yet in spite of the discovery of thousands of scrolls and fragments, there are still many mysteries surrounding these infamous scrolls and caves of Qumran.
What hasn't been found is quite important, and I think one should say that. No, not one fragment of the Gospels has been found hitherto amongst the writings of the Dead Sea Scrolls sect, and also no writings which could be perhaps associated with John the Baptist. That's quite important. What isn't there, I think.
With thousands of caves in the Qumran region and around the Dead Sea, scholars are hopeful that more scrolls will be found, and that they will reveal greater insight into an important time in history.
I still think that there's a potential of discovering scrolls in that region. Personally, I would like to see a thorough scientific investigation made of the caves and the vicinity in order to look at all the different sort of possibilities. Of course, one hears from time to time rumors of a scroll that has surfaced somewhere in Bethlehem. But you know, it's very difficult to know what's behind these rumors. I've heard these rumors from a number of different sources now. So it is a possibility that one day some amazing scroll will surface, and I'd like to be the person at the spot when it surfaces, but you know, we'll have to see.
The Caves of Qumran have given us some amazing secrets from the past. Yet while answering many questions, these fascinating writings still hold many mysteries. Today, the scrolls and other articles from the Qumran caves can be seen at the Israel Museum in Jerusalem in the Shrine of the Book. Visitors can see for themselves a piece of biblical history and experience for a moment the wonder and the awe that has for the most part been reserved for archaeologists, scholars, and shepherds who have stumbled into mysterious caves looking for their sheep. Who knows what secrets may yet be revealed? The Qumran caves and the Dead Sea Scrolls are fascinating remnants of Jewish history that have been unearthed in Israel's ancient soil.